Good afternoon. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's webinar, Evolving Engineering Registration, Queensland and Beyond. My name is Megan Purdy and I'll be your host for today. Firstly, in keeping with our custom, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders, past and present. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that today's webinar is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner, BPEQ, Board of Professional Engineers, Queensland. BPEQ is the first engineering regulatory body established in Australia. Since 1930, Queensland has led the way in the regulation of the engineering profession. Owing to the foresight of University of Queensland's Professor Roger Hawken, Queensland has had a regulatory scheme that protects the public and sets the standard of engineering for the last 94 years. The Professional Engineers Act sets out the establishment of a regulatory scheme for engineers known as the Registered Professional Engineer of Queensland, RPEQ system. There are currently more than 24,000 RPEQs who work in and for Queensland. Now, in today's session, we will feature two speakers followed by our live audience Q&A. So, as always, I encourage you to please send your questions through to our speakers via the chat box. I now have the pleasure of welcoming our speakers for today, Timea Steptoe and Dennis Slade. Timea commenced as Registrar at the Board of Professional Engineers of Queensland in July 2022. Timea has more than 20 years' experience in a variety of Queensland government roles with a background in the development and implementation of policy, operational management and organisational change management. With degrees in commerce and international business, Timea is a highly experienced professional with a strong focus on governance and effective stakeholder engagement at all levels. Dennis Slade is the Head of Registration at Engineers Australia. Dennis is an experienced electrical engineer with a strong background in electronics manufacturing, having worked in both small and large Australian engineering businesses. Before joining Engineers Australia, he held roles in management systems, certification, business improvement, and product certification at SAI Global, the largest certification body in Australia. Please join me in welcoming Timea Steptoe and Dennis Slade.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you again for the opportunity to present today at the EA webinar to collaborate with Engineers Australia, and thank you, Megan, for that lovely introduction. Today I will be working through a few slides with Dennis, who is the Head of Registration at EA. So let me just start again from our end to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. In terms of today's presentation, we will go through a few slides and there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. So we'll start with who we are in terms of what the board does, what the Professional Engineers Act in Queensland means for engineers. Dennis will give an update on the national landscape and what that looks like in its current state. I will then go through some RPEQ basics and processes around becoming an RPEQ. Dennis will take over to provide an update in terms of the EA assessment process and what that looks like and the different options that engineers have to work with EA. And I will finish the presentation by talking about discipline and compliance and what happens when someone does not comply with the Act. And of course, like I said, there will be plenty of time for questions and answers. In terms of who we are, as Megan had already kindly said, we are the first engineering regulator in Australia. We are a statutory body, so that means that we have a 7-member board that provides the strategic direction for our operations, and we have a staff of about 22 that manage the operations of the board. The UQ's University of Queensland Professor Roger Hawken was the driving force behind establishing this system, which was first put into place in 1930. So just back in August, we had celebrated our 95th birthday. We have 3 key functions, and everything that we can and can't do is set out quite specifically in the Professional Engineers Act and the associated Professional Engineers Registration regulation. So the three key functions of the board is to register RPEQs, to keep that register, and to conduct or authorise investigations about either professional conduct of our RPEQs or those who may contravene the Act in some other way. This is the numbers of current RPEQs that we have as at the end of June this financial year. That number always drops from the 1st of July for those RPEQs who may not renew their registration. I just got some current data for you all. So as of this morning, our total registration numbers sit at 24,192. And as you would expect, the large majority of those are in fact practicing RPEQs. So about 23,600 practicing RPEQs. And we also managed a total of just under 1,000 new registrations so far this financial year. And now over to Dennis to talk about what's happening across the other jurisdictions.
Thanks, Tamir. So as you may be aware, in Australia, engineering registration is being implemented across all the states and territories, across most states and territories. In Queensland, for example, registration's been in place since 1930. And there are 19 areas of engineering across all industries. In New South Wales, registration's been in place since 2021. There are 6 areas of engineering, and it applies to the building industry only. In Victoria, registration also came in 2021 in 5 areas of engineering in all industries, including the building industry. In the ACT, registration commenced in March 2024 with 5 areas of engineering, all industries, including the building and construction industry. Registration commenced in Western Australia in July 2024, covering 4 areas of engineering in the building industry only. And importantly, it covers professional engineers, technologists and associates, and also requires the registration of contractors in WA, which means companies. South Australia, there is a development of a Professional Engineers Act potentially underway, or that may be in flux at the moment. In Tasmania, there's limited licensing of engineers in the building industry. In the Northern Territory, there are some certifying engineer requirements. So as you can see, it's different across all the states and territories across Australia. Back to you, Tamir.
Great, thank you, Dennis. So I think that was a great overview of just to show everyone just how diverse engineering registration currently is. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention to everyone as well, we often get questions about, well, what's the difference between being a member of Engineers Australia or one of another membership body compared to being an RPEQ? And as you can see on the slide, both Engineers Australia and those other membership bodies are, like I said, they're membership organisations. They are definitely nationally and internationally recognised. However, they're not the regulatory body, and it is not a legal requirement for any engineer to be registered with them. In Queensland and in those states where registration is now compulsory, for any engineer to be providing those professional engineering services, you must be registered with the relevant regulatory body. In terms of some basics for everyone to be aware, again, well, why would you become an RPEQ? And I have spoken about many of these things already around engineers holding themselves to a high standard of professionalism, having completed the necessary education and training, having your skills assessed, and also having that continuous development in place. But fundamentally, it is the law in Queensland and across many other jurisdictions as well. Again, we often get asked this question, what is a professional engineering service? And I'm sure those of you who are online, most of you are engineers, so you can probably tell me this better than I will ever know. Professional engineering service is defined in our legislation as the definition that you can see on the screen right now. And I can certainly tell you that anything and everything that we do at the board comes down to this definition. So if this definition applies, then the Professional Engineers Act applies to engineers. If the activity that an engineer might do does not fit into this definition, then they do not need to be registered. It is also important to understand that the Act applies in 3 discrete instances. So if an engineer is providing those professional engineering services in Queensland for Queensland, it applies as you would expect. So if it's a project that is situated in Queensland and the engineer themselves is in Queensland, it applies. However, it also applies if those services are provided in Queensland for anywhere else in the world. So any Queensland engineer, their services across the world would be captured by the requirements of the Professional Engineers Act. And the same thing applies in reverse. So if there's an engineer sitting anywhere across the world or anywhere across in Australia, if that specific activity is specific for Queensland, then the Professional Engineers Act also applies. However, there are two distinct exceptions to this rule. First of which is direct supervision. So, of course, when an engineer first becomes completes their education, or whilst they're doing that education, they need to be directly supervised. We can't expect a person to come out of university and to have the necessary competency to be able to be registered. So it is really important that everyone gets directly supervised if they're providing those professional engineering services until they can become registered. And there is more information on our website about what this means and how it applies to engineers. The second instance is when someone is following a prescriptive standard. Now, again, what a prescriptive standard is defined in the legislation, and you can see that definition on the slide. But what I like to actually say is, being European, as you may have guessed from my accent by now, I do love a bit of Lego. And one of my former investigators had come up with this little slide for me as a non-engineer, to try to understand what a prescriptive standard could be. So let's say you get a lovely Lego set and the instructions tell you to build a crocodile, and you follow the instructions step by step, and you do not veer away from those instructions. One can say at a very high level that could potentially say that we have been following a prescriptive standard. However, of course, if you decide to freestyle and move away from those instructions and decide to, in fact, turn that crocodile into a turtle, because that is where the wind takes you, that, of course, you would think that is not a prescriptive standard. Now, I just want to point out this is a very simple explanation of what a prescriptive standard may be. If someone's not sure, they should definitely get some advice to make sure that they comply with the Act's requirements. In terms of becoming an RPEQ, as I said earlier, there are 2 types of registration here in Queensland. As the name suggests, for practicing RPEQs, and as I have already covered, the large majority of our RPEQs are in fact practicing. So they can call themselves an RPEQ, and they are in fact permitted to carry out those professional engineering services in their area of competence, and there are no restrictions on those. However, for various reasons, some engineers may choose to become non-practicing RPEQs. So these may be for engineers who could be on a career break, or they may be travelling, or they may be in a more executive position in a particular organisation. It's really important to note with the non-practicing RPEQ that whilst these members, these registrants can certainly call themselves an RPEQ, they're not permitted to carry out professional engineering services. There is a 4-step registration process that I wanted to just step through, and then I will hand over to Dennis to explain what this actually looks like from a practical perspective from an assessment entity's end. So steps 1 and 2 is what the board sets as its eligibility criteria. So every 2 years under the Professional Engineers Act, the board must get together and consider what are the minimum qualifications and level of experience that the board expects for engineers to hold before they are eligible to become an RPEQ. So those current requirements are to have a relevant Washington Accord recognised degree or equivalent, and to have at least 4 years of experience carrying out those professional engineering services post-graduation. Step number 3 is the assessment, which is done by our assessment entities, which Dennis will go through. And then step 4 is our registration pathway. So once Engineers Australia has completed the assessment, they will produce a letter of eligibility. That letter of eligibility then needs to be submitted to my team along with a completed registration form. We will then process that registration form, provided everything is in place and all the documentation is correct. We will always do a double check with the relevant assessment entity as well to check the validity of that letter. Provided all of that goes smoothly, it takes around 2 weeks from our end to get that registration completed. And once that registration is completed, you will then receive an email from myself or my team, and that will include your RPEQ number and link to our portal where you'll be able to manage your future interaction with the board. In areas of engineering, so those 19 areas are currently on the screen. So depending on which area someone would like to be registered in, you can have a look on our website to see which of our 11 assessment entities will assess those. Of course, EA is our largest assessment entity that we work with, but I have to just let everyone know that we do have a number of other ones that we work with as well. And just my final slide before I hand over to Dennis. So just a reminder again that there is an annual renewal requirement, which is prescribed in the legislation. So every RPEQ must renew their registration on an annual basis. And all of this can be done through our portal. There are some CPD requirements that go with that. And these CPD requirements are in line with industry standards. So that's 150 hours over a 3-year period. That is certainly in line with what Engineers Australia requires and other assessment entities as well. The other thing to point out with CPD requirements as well is that should an engineer be a member of Engineers Australia, for example, and if they are tracking their CPD through Engineers Australia and they tell us that that's what they are doing at the renewal period, that is sufficient for the board for us to understand that the registrant has complied with the the renewal requirements in terms of CPD. So if someone's keeping their CPD with Engineers Australia, the board will not be auditing them to make sure that they comply. However, Engineers Australia may. So I just wanted to point that out to everyone. And I believe now it is over to Dennis for him to take you through what the application process looks like from their end.
So thanks, Tamia. So prior to applying to the BPEQ to be registered, individuals need to get their qualifications, competence and experience assessed by an approved assessment entity. And as Tamia said, we are one of them. We are one of 11 approved assessment entities for Queensland. So once they've been assessed, individuals then need to apply for registration with the BPEQ, where they'll need to complete an application, declare fitness to practice and pay an application fee. So how can EA help? Well, we're a recognised assessment entity for Queensland. We're a central source of information on registration requirements. And as mentioned, we've got a dedicated page on our website, which provides updates as they occur on registration requirements across the country. We also offer business-to-business partnerships to ensure compliance and capability, and we can work with organisations to directly engage their engineers and support them through the relevant assessment pathways. So as I've mentioned, EA provides 3 different assessment pathways that enable someone to get registered in Queensland. So first off, we have the non-member pathway, which is also called the State Registration Eligibility Pathway. And this pathway meets the minimum level of compliance for registration and involves assessment of 5 elements of competence. We then have our 2 member pathways, first being the National Engineering Register, or the NER. So this pathway also meets the minimum level of compliance for registration and involves assessment of 5 elements of competence. And finally, we have our chartered pathway. So by comparison, the chartered credential is an internationally recognised measure of your competence and provides an assessment of the 16 elements of competency. So let's take a look at these at a high level. So firstly, the state registration eligibility requirements. So this relates specifically to non-members of EA who are seeking to be assessed for registration eligibility in Queensland. So the first step is to provide evidence of your Washington Accord accredited qualification or an equivalent. And once we have that, you'll complete an independent practice assessment, taking into account the 5 competency elements, which I'll share with you on the next slide. You'll also be asked to supply 2 referees who can attest to your recent work experience. The assessor will contact them for a discussion about you and what they know of your work experience. You'll then be invited to a professional interview, which will be held virtually and really allows for an in-depth discussion about your broad engineering career with reference to the identified areas of practice. All being well, you'll receive a successful outcome, and then we'll have access to the RPEQ assessment letter, which you can then access from the EA portal. So what you see on the screen are the 5 elements of competence that you're asked to demonstrate as part of the assessment process. And there's more information about what each of these elements actually mean in practice on our website. So the National Engineering Register, or the NER, is the first of 2 member assessment pathways. So what is the NER? So Engineers Australia introduced the NER in 2015. It's a comprehensive directory, and it's a way to recognise engineers who meet high standards of skill, qualification and professionalism expected in the industry. It's a publicly searchable database, and the NER gives individuals and businesses access to qualified pool of engineers endorsed by EA. The NER assessment process is not unlike the state registration eligibility pathway. However, it's a member pathway. You'll already had your qualifications verified, which, as you can see, removes that initial step. So you'll then complete an independent practice assessment, taking into account the same 5 competency elements that I shared on the previous slide. And you'll be asked to supply 2 referees who can attest to your recent work experience and that the assessor can contact for a discussion. You'll then be invited to a professional interview, which again will be held virtually and allows for an in-depth discussion about your broad engineering career with reference to your identified areas of practice. So as mentioned, those 5 NER competencies are the same as those required to be demonstrated for the state registration eligibility assessment pathway. So then we come to the second member assessment pathway, the chartered credential. And there are actually 4 pathways you can take. The chartered pathway, the chartered credential could be granted to you if you are chartered with one of the international engineering bodies with who we have a formal agreement. So if you hold charter status internationally, please check our website to see if this might apply to you. We have the standard chartered pathway for those with approximately 5 to 15 years experience. We have a chartered via interview pathway for those who have 15 or more years of experience, and our workforce credentialing partnerships, which is our B2B arrangement. So if you'd like to explore this further, please complete the survey at the end or ask questions via the chat. So unlike the state registration eligibility and the NER assessments, which ask for demonstration of 5 elements of competence, the chartered process asks you to demonstrate 16 competencies by putting together a portfolio of your work. These competencies are the international benchmark set by the International Engineering Alliance. So these competencies are broad enough to represent every discipline of engineering and can be applied to whichever part of the engineering life cycle you're involved in, whether that's design, construction, maintenance, or overall project management. And when you demonstrate your competence, keep in mind it needs to be in an engineering context. So you can see these competencies are grouped into 4 core areas around personal commitment, obligation to the community, value in the workplace, and technical proficiency. You'll note that the highlighted text, there's 5 competencies that are required to be demonstrated for both state registration eligibility and the NER assessments, which form a subset of the broader 16. So again, there's a useful document on the EA website that provides much more detailed information on the competencies and what they mean in practice as well. And it provides some useful indications of attainment. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that document if you're considering any of those assessment pathways. We're not going to delve into the detail about becoming chartered in today's session, as the focus for today is on the registration process and understanding what it applies and highlight the role that the A plays. Now, you can find the assessment letters that I referred to earlier once you've successfully completed the assessment process. So you do this by logging into the EA portal. You click on My EA at the top of the page, select registration on the side menu, and you'll have access to the relevant letter depending on what you've been assessed for. So an RPEQ assessment letter, if seeking registration in Queensland, or for example, it could be a Victorian registration outcome report if you're seeking registration in Victoria. So these letters are what's required to confirm that you've been successfully assessed for the purposes of a state-based registration. You then complete the relevant registration process with the relevant regulator, in this case the BPEQ, and you go through the application process and you pay a registration fee with the regulator. So what's next after the assessment outcome? So it's a 2-step process. So once you've had your assessment with Engineers Australia and you've got your outcome report, you'll take that outcome letter and apply to the BPEQ to be registered. And as Tamir said earlier, you need to submit evidence of the assessment. You'll have to go through the fit and proper person requirements and pay an application fee. Back to you, Tamir.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. So far we've learned about and we've spoken about why it's important to register and what the registration system looks like here in Queensland. We also looked at the requirements to be registered and the process to become registered. At the end of my last update, I also mentioned that there is an annual renewal requirement for all RPEQs to make sure that they renew. And don't worry, you will receive plenty of reminders from my team to ask everyone to renew. And like I said, it is all to be able to be done online very, very easily and quickly. And at that point, we do ask to make sure that you are still complying with those fitness to practice requirement, and also that the CPD requirements have been met. I also just wanted to take just a few slides and a few moments to look at what happens when things don't quite go as well as they could, and what happens in our discipline and compliance function as well, because I think it's really important for engineers to understand. So for those of you who are based in Queensland, you might be aware of other building industry regulators, and some building industry regulators have a wide range of powers where they may be able to order certain people to rectify their work or assess safety risks like Workplace Health and Safety Queensland, for example, or other bodies may be able to provide legal advice on certain matters. What the board can and can't do is very specifically outlined in the Professional Engineers Act. So whilst there are many things that we are not able to do, what we can and do actually do is pursue those disciplinary matters. And these are for RPEQs who have not met the requirements of the board and have undertaken what we refer to as unsatisfactory professional conduct. And we are also able to and do follow up on compliance matters. And these are for those matters or for those who may not have complied with the Act. So I'm just going to go through these in a tiny bit more detail and give you an example for each. So non-compliance with the Act. I can see that one of the pre-questions that we had received relates just to this topic. So non-compliance is when someone is claiming to be an RPEQ or using the title RPEQ when they are in fact not registered. And most importantly, it also applies when someone is carrying out those professional engineering services when not registered or not under the direct supervision of an RPEQ. So here's an example that has happened recently. This was when an interstate engineer was providing these professional engineering services in Queensland and they did not comply with the Act. As I said, the Act makes it very clear that any person providing those services in or for Queensland, regardless of where they are physically located, must be either an RPEQ or be directly supervised unless they are conducting, providing those prescriptive standards. We had received a complaint in relation to this person's activities, and once the matter was investigated, the board did initiate legal proceedings against this engineer in the Magistrates Court for conducting these services, these professional engineering services, outside of their state, but within Queensland, without proper registration. What is important to note here is that for these matters, they will end up at the Magistrates Court because it is a compliance matter and it will be dealt with as a criminal offence. Through the process with the Magistrates Court, in the end, the engineer pleaded guilty to contravening the Act, and the court imposed a monetary penalty for this engineer to pay, and they were also ordered to pay a proportion of the board's legal cost. What's important to also note is that there was actually no issues with as far as the board was made aware, of the quality of the work of the engineer that had been completed. It was due to the fact that this engineer did not comply with the Act because they knowingly had undertaken these services without being registered. It's also important to point out that this was not their first time, which is why these quite significant penalties were awarded. For those of you who might want to find out about other instances when this may have happened, we do have a range of case notes on our website for both the discipline and compliance section, where you can read a bit more about how these things could play out. And the second instance when the board may be able to take action is when it comes to disciplinary matters. So disciplinary matters relate to RPEQs and their conduct. So if the board finds that it is unsatisfactory professional conduct, this matter may end up at QCAT, or the board can actually impose other penalties such as a caution or a reprimand. So this is another case that I would like to just highlight for everyone today. So this was a recent case where the board had received a complaint about the conduct of an RPEQ in relation to professional engineering services, of course, but carried out at two different properties. This matter was investigated and the board did find that this particular RPEQ did undertake unsatisfactory professional conduct, and you can read on the slide what specifically the issues were. As I said, these cases are taken to QCAT, and following the QCAT proceedings, the tribunal did order the RPEQ to be reprimanded and to pay monetary penalties up to $50,000 to the board. Now, you will see and you would know that the board does have an online directory. So our online directory includes all of our current and former RPEQs. And for those RPEQs who may have been reprimanded by either the board or by QCAT, they will actually have a note on their file, which is publicly available. So it's really important for members of the public to check our directory, and also to understand, for engineers to understand that these matters can and will stay on your record if it is at that significant level. And finally, I promise this is my last slide, just a few tips for all engineers in terms of what you can all do to comply with the Professional Engineers Act. If you're being hired or engaged for your engineering skills, I always say to all engineers, assume that it will be professional engineering services and make sure that you are registered, and make sure that, or if you can't be registered yet, make sure you are directly supervised. I also want to reiterate to everyone to keep professional records of any decisions that had been made, and also in relation to the direct supervision. We always ask everyone to renew registration during the renewal period, which is from the 1st of April until the end of June. So it's a long period of time, and renewal is very easy. We had a very highly successful renewal period last financial year, where over 95% of our RPEQs renewed their registration on time, which is a really great outcome. So thank you to our RPEQs for doing that. And of course, as part of that, we always ask everyone to make sure that you do complete your CPD and that you do keep professional records of those CPD hours as well. And this is when a professional body like EA can be extremely helpful for you to be assisted with some CPD courses that they offer. We also need to make sure that engineers maintain their practice within their own area of engineering and the area of competence, to make sure that they do not practice outside their competence, which could actually be non-compliance with the Act as well. And of course, most importantly, if someone puts a piece of paper in front of you to say, oh, this is all fine, just sign it, please. Understand what you are signing and be clear on what that means, that you are in fact putting your professional reputation on the line, and you are being held responsible, or you could be held responsible for what you are signing. So if in doubt, please get registered. And if you're not sure, talk to a membership body like EA, who will be able to assist you with that process. And that is the end of our slides. For those of you who are able to, if you click on that QR code, that will take you through to our LinkedIn page. And that LinkedIn page is usually current with any new updates and news, so I encourage everyone to do that. But I think I'm going to hand back over to Megan now, and we'll go through some Q&A.
Thank you so much. Well, now it's our audience's turn to get involved. So please don't forget, please submit your questions in the chat box and let us know who your question is directed to. Don't forget to let me know your name, and I'll ensure that that question is asked. A big thank you to everyone who submitted questions while registering for the webinar today. And what I might do is kick off with a couple of those. So we'll bring Tamaya and Dennis back in. I can already see that we had a live question come through from Lucas. So a big hello to Lucas. And it really kind of ties into a couple of the questions that we received on registration. So the questions are all about mutual recognition. So I might use Barry from Victoria's question, because I thought it would be a good place to start. So Tamaya, I'll direct this one to you. Where members already hold NER and a registration in another state, in his example, RPEV in Victoria, how can this be used effectively towards joining BPEQ and obtaining RPEQ?
Great. That's a great question. And we do have, often when we do these presentations, questions around recognising other states' registrations and making it as easy for engineers to travel between jurisdictions often comes up. So thank you, Barry, for that question. The board does recognise that there are different levels of registration in various states. So you would have seen that slide that Dennis showed earlier that shows the legislation landscape across other jurisdictions. It means that there is not a strict alignment across all jurisdictions, because of course every state is slightly different. What the board here in Queensland has done is they had looked at other states' registration systems, and they had developed what their preliminary position is on what they call mutual recognition, and that is available on our website. So on our website, you can see what the board's preliminary view is on certain registration systems across other jurisdictions and certain areas of engineering. I also have to point out, though, that every single application through mutual recognition, it's still assessed on a case-by-case basis. We do not receive a high volume of these, but they are definitely always looked at to assess whether equivalence is there, And if it is, then the application will be successful. If not, my team will work with the engineer to look at what other options might be available for them. And I'm not sure if, Dennis, you wanted to mention anything else about being chartered, because I think being chartered potentially could mean that an engineer may be able to access a letter of eligibility as well.
Yes, that's correct. So if you've already been chartered and had a chartered assessment, then you've already been assessed against the qualifications and the competency and experience requirements for registration eligibility in Queensland. So that's another option. So if you're already chartered, you'll be able to download an outcome letter for registration eligibility in Queensland, assuming your area of practice is one of the areas of practice for registration in Queensland.
Awesome. Thank you both. Well, Dennis, talking chartered, we had a question come through from Umesh, who is from WA. And the question was around the pathway to becoming chartered. Specifically, the question was around they have a total of 22 to 23 years experience working within engineering teams. So maybe if you could just run through the pathways available for chartered.
Yeah, so look, as we spoke about earlier, there's a number of different pathways for chartered, and with a large number of years experience like that, there is a pathway for greater than 15 years worth of experience. But I would encourage you to have a look at our website, which will list all the requirements that you need for that process. We'll have to obviously assess everyone's application on a case-by-case basis.
Awesome. Thanks, Dennis. Now we have the next question, which I might direct towards yourself, Tamara, with regards to, as an international graduate, how does this registration going to impact? Hold on, let me try that question again. As an international graduate, how is registration going to impact or assist in advancing my career in Australia?
Thank you, Megan. That is a great question as well. And I've spoken about why you would become registered, which is all about having your skills assessed and having the necessary education in place and having a commitment to having a continuous development in place. However, fundamentally, if anyone would like to and is providing those professional engineering services in or for Queensland, they must be registered, because that is the legislation that is in place currently. So, and that is regardless of what industry or what area they're in. There are currently 19 areas, so it is not industry specific, unlike some other states where it may be restricted to the building industry, for example. Here in Queensland, regardless of the industry that someone works in, as soon as those professional engineering services criteria is met, someone needs to be registered. I would also like to add to that too, that I also love to see just how much pride people have in being an RPEQ, and just how lovely it is for us to see that people show that pride and are able to call themselves an RPEQ as well, which will certainly help you advance in your engineering field. I also know that many organisations, and certainly many government organisations, for engineering professions or engineering roles, often an element of the criteria for someone to be eligible to be considered for a role is to be either an RPEQ or to be able to get RPEQ straight away. So that's just what I would like to add to that question.
Awesome. Thank you. Dennis, I've got a question which has come through from Ellie from Victoria. And I know you've touched on it during your slides, but she's asked the question, can we streamline the process of NER to RPEQ?
Yeah, okay, so NER is one of the three pathways that we discussed to become eligible for registration in Queensland. So it is just one of the three. So if you've been assessed for NER, then if you're successful, you meet the requirements for state registration eligibility in Queensland. It's just one of the pathways. So having a successful NER outcome in one of those areas of engineering would mean that you get an outcome letter, which you could then take to the BPEQ to become registered in Queensland. So yes, it's just one of the three pathways you can use.
Definitely. Thanks, Dennis. Tamir, we've had a few questions come through very much around, I suppose, RPEQ and the impact when design is carried out either overseas or if they're importing plant and equipment from overseas to be used in Australia. So I was just wondering if you could maybe clarify that for our audience. So it's very much what that means.
Sure. And I did touch on this during my updates as well, but I'm always happy to clarify it so that people understand the reach of the Professional Engineers Act. So as I said, the Professional Engineers Act applies for any of those professional engineering services in or for Queensland. So regardless of where something is put together, if it's specifically for Queensland, the Professional Engineers Act will apply. But it needs to be specific to Queensland. So it can't be a generic product that is being used anywhere around the world, which I know makes it really difficult. It is a judgment decision for engineers to decide. Whilst the board is not able to provide specific legal or technical advice on what this looks like in specific instances, we do have a number of practice notes on our website that I encourage everyone to look at. So the practice notes that would be particularly relevant in these questions is just what professional engineering services is and what the different elements are, and that practice note breaks it down really well. And there is also another one that is called the extraterritoriality application of the Professional Engineers Act, which just looks at how the Professional Engineers Act applies to other jurisdictions. So I encourage everyone to take a look at those practice notes. And if it's still not clear, I suggest that people and organisations get their own advice, and with that advice in hand, make some informed decisions and document those decisions. So should anyone ask questions, or should there be an issue that comes up that comes to the attention of the board, the individual or organisation can say, here's the process that we had undertaken to confirm what our view is and our position is on this particular activity. I hope that helps.
Thanks, ma'am. I'll direct the next question to yourself. It's from Sonia from Queensland. And Sonia's question was, while the Professional Engineers Act imposes penalties on RPEQs for breaches, there appears to be limited consequences for unregistered persons who provide engineering services without registration. I think it's, and I know you touched on this, but she has asked what mechanisms are in place, if any.
Sure. Thank you, Sonia, for the question. Great question as well. Again, our Act applies when those professional engineering services are provided. So there are many things that an engineer does that may not be professional engineering services, but as soon as professional engineering services is applied, the Professional Engineers Act applies in this scenario. As I had said earlier, if someone provides those professional engineering services whilst they are not registered, it is actually breaking the Professional Engineers Act. And should that matter be investigated, and should the board find that in fact sections of the Act were not complied with while they should have been, this matter can end up at the Magistrates Court as a criminal matter for that particular individual. And there had been many instances in the past where the board had taken that path, where the board had taken individuals to court for providing those professional engineering services whilst not registered. So there might be a misconception out there that it is not worth to be registered because the penalties are non-existent for those who are not registered, but they are there for those who are registered. That is not actually the case. The board very much has the powers to both discipline RPEQs who have conducted unsatisfactory professional conduct, but to also take individuals to the Magistrates Court should they be found by the board to have provided those professional engineering services whilst not registered. And just as a last second, sorry, Megan, I do encourage everyone to have a look at our website with our case notes, which are in two distinct areas, one for disciplinary matters and one for compliance matters, just so it gives an outline of some instances where this has happened in the past.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Look, I think we've actually gone through all our questions for today. Now, what I might ask of both of our speakers, and I haven't told them this, but if you've got maybe any key takeaways or final comments or words of advice that you'd like to give our audience today, what I might do is kick off with yourself, Dennis, to go first.
Yeah, look, as we spoke about earlier, there's lots of different requirements for registration across Australia, and there's lots of information on the EA website. So if you just go to the registration page, we will explain what the requirements are for each of those states with links to the regulators' websites and questions if you need them answered. But if you're unsure, please have a look at our website, or you can email us at registration@engineersaustralia.org.au.
Awesome. Thank you. Tamaya?
And look, my message is very similar. As I said earlier, if someone is not sure whether they should be registered or whether something that they're doing might be professional engineering services, please do pursue that registration pathway, and please work with our assessment bodies such as Engineers Australia, who are a fountain of knowledge, to get that process underway. And if, as Dennis said, if you're not sure, our website also contains lots of very useful information, including links back to the Engineers Australia website. And my team is always happy to help. So either give us a call or follow us on LinkedIn, or email my team at admin@bpeq.qld.gov.au, please. And thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. So please join me in thanking our speakers, Tamaya Steptoe and Dennis Slade, for their time and input. I'd also like to thank Engineers Australia's industry partner, BPEQ, for their support. We would appreciate if you could take a moment to complete the short feedback form, which is linked in the description box below. Your input, it really does help us to improve and plan future sessions. So finally, thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Industry Partners event. Good afternoon.